Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Meta Report. Today we're going to be talking about the most broken heroes this patch, as well as specific items and how the latest patch has affected the meta as a whole, taking on both a European and North American perspective, as I always try to watch as many tournaments and matches in general to know what's the best to give the information to you guys. I'm your host Deathy, let's get started. Starting off with general meta changes, this patch didn't affect the meta too much, so I would say that there's three main things that have changed. The first thing is that double soaking is gone. So for those that don't know what double soaking was, it's basically where you went in between two lanes and you got full value of souls from both lanes. So you can no longer do that. I'm not going to get into the specifics of how it works because it's not important for the video. Just know that they implemented a mechanic that basically restricts you to only getting the full value from one wave before 8 minutes, which means that in the laning stage, effectively, it's completely gone. And so it's pointless to do now. The second thing is that there is now diminishing stacking on ability range and ability duration. So this was already a thing for cooldown, but it's now a thing for duration and range, which means that buying a ton of duration and range items has, it's not as strong as it was before. So for example, going Carpet as well as Arcane Surge and improved reach, extended duration, etc., is not going to be as strong as Dynamos on Dynamo and on a bunch of other heroes, but this has been mostly a Dynamo nerf, I would say, and as well as Viscous. And the third thing is that they nerfed a bunch of gun items, only very slightly, but they nerfed pretty much the whole gun category. Maybe not all of it. Some items are still quite strong. We'll talk about that later, but especially the 500 cost items were all nerfed in the gun category almost. So gun is slightly worse, but it's still very strong. Let's get into some specific heroes that are very strong right now, and we'll talk about why. First of all, I'd like to mention Mirage. I think Mirage is one of the strongest heroes of the patch, and why is that? It's because mainly of the new Scarab change, as well as a couple of other reasons, but I think the Scarab change is the biggest factor. So before, when you hit Scarab on one person, you couldn't Scarab them again, right? So if I would Scarab them once, I couldn't Scarab them again, and that meant that I could steal a maximum of 90 health, kind of like I did to this dummy. Now, if you throw a Scarab at someone, as I will demonstrate on this other dummy, you can basically refresh the duration of the Scarab. So if I just go ahead and reset my hero, if I throw the first Scarab, well, it's actually glitched, but basically I could throw my Scarab again and refresh the duration, which means that I can steal a total of 200 health. It's actually a little over 200 health. I believe it's around 210 health or 220 health that you can steal from someone max. And this is starting level 1. This means that Scarab is basically insane in lane, and Mirage is already really, really strong in lane, but I think he's even stronger now with this new change. And this also applies to later in the game, so you can refresh your Scarab on one person, which makes it even stronger in a 1v1 situation. And the hero was already pretty strong, but I think that this really, really took him to the next level, and we can see that reflected on the win rates. His win rate skyrocketed, I think, by like 3 or almost 4%, and so he's definitely one of the strongest heroes of the patch. As far as the build that I'd recommend you go, there's a lot of different builds out there. I just reworked on my own build right here. So this is a mix of like gun and utility Mirage. So it's not the highest Mirage DPS build. This focuses on, having a lot of utility, having a lot of barriers, being fairly tanky, but still having like a good amount of DPS. And so it feels very good to play for me. And so I would highly recommend you guys check it out. I'll put the build ID in the description below, but it's Deathy's Gun Mirage. So you can search it in game, but there's going to be the build ID as well. This basically focuses on barriers as well as using the item Alchemical Fire in order to help you not only kill people, because you can throw Alchemical Fire and tornado the people in it, but it also helps you split push and just do things that Mirage is really good at, and it also helps you farm, which Mirage kind of sucks at naturally. So just a really nice item on him. Let's talk about McGinnis a little bit. Now, do I think McGinnis is broken or OP? Absolutely not. And do I think she needs nerfs? I don't think she needs nerfs at the moment, but I wanted to talk about the resurgence of a specific McGinnis playstyle that's come out recently, which is Gun McGinnis. So Gun McGinnis isn't new. It's been a thing for quite a long time, but it's been popularized a little bit more recently, particularly in EU, where it's been picked in tournaments, such as by Zergy, if you guys have seen in the last couple of days. And so here I've got the build, which is Naked's Gun McGinnis. So once again, there's going to be the ID in the description, but McGinnis's gun is just extremely strong. It has like one of the highest DPSs in the game, and so if you start scaling the gun and you buy all these items, you'll do like a very, very surprising amount of damage. And if you combine that with the utility you have with your wall, then you become like a very strong 1v1er, and you can catch people off, and you just have a lot of DPS and some utility with the wall and heal and turrets, which are okay. So it's not like broken or anything, but I think it's a very strong McGinnis playstyle, and if you guys haven't tried that, I recommend that you do. Infernus now has charges on his dash if you max his dash, which makes him, I would say, a lot stronger because he didn't really receive any other nerfs, right? So it was mostly just he got ability charges on his max dash, and that was pretty much it. And so I would recommend that you guys try this Noizeeh build, new Infernus God mode. The idea will be in the description. The idea is you get rapid recharge when you have your 2 maxed, and then you just have 3 You essentially have 3 flame dashes, right? So you can just kind of flame dash around, and you can play Infernus kind of like the same old way that you would play it, except you have a ton more mobility. This helps you farm, this helps you fight, and so overall I think Infernus is a lot stronger than he was pre-patch. I still don't think he's insane at top levels, because at top levels you still just get spam slowing hex or spam knockdown or whatever it is. But I think in you guys' games, most likely Infernus is having a lot of success. Let me know if it's otherwise. But if you guys want to try a build, this one looks pretty good. I tried it myself one game and it felt pretty decent. You can obviously make modifications as well. Like when I suggest any build, there's always modifications to take into account if you guys don't like it. But I think that this is a very good canvas to start on. So Yamato's latest changes seem to have pushed her back into the very, very strong, if not broken category. So the changes were on her shadow transformation. Now it takes much less time to cast, and as soon as you cast it, you're actionable, which means that you can cast it and just like insta grapple to someone. If you basically just spam 2, sometimes you grapple like before your ult is even over, which is kind of insane because nobody can really run away from you. Whereas before it was kind of balanced around the fact that, hey, if you ult, I'm gonna run around a corner and then I'll be fine. But now like no one can run away from you, and you just do a ton of damage still, and now you have extra resist once you max your ult, which is also very strong. So I would recommend that you guys try the Ronald build. This is one of the oldest Yamato builds out there. There's a lot of other builds. For example, you can try Ido's builds. You can try, you know, some European builds like Dimov maybe, and they're all good. The only reason I recommend Ronald is because Ronald plays almost exclusively Yamato. I mean, he plays some other characters, but he plays mostly Yamato, and he always keeps it updated. It's one of the OG builds. The build ID is only 4 numbers, so he's had 47 different versions of this build, and he's always available to answer questions, etc. So I would really recommend that you guys follow his build. But feel free to experiment with other builds. Yamato is just extremely strong right now, and so I think you can build a lot of different things on her and it would be fine. So it's not a huge deal if you want to follow another build, but that's the one I recommend. So Lash was already pretty decent, but he had kind of fallen off a little bit because late game, well, he just wasn't that useful. But that's all changed with the new change to his ultimate, which now if you max it, stuns enemies in the landing zone for 1 second. This is way stronger than it sounds at first, because you might be thinking, oh, 1 second stun, how big of a deal is that? But it's a huge deal, because before, when Lash would ult people, he would not guaranteed get follow-up with a slam, for example, because there was a lot of abilities that could dodge afterwards. Like Yamato could ult after she got ulted, Mirage could tornado, Dynamo could use his quantum entanglement. I mean, there's a lot of ways to get out of it after you got slammed. So it's a very strong displacement tool, but it wasn't really that useful for killing people. Or it was useful, but like you needed some follow-up on it that you couldn't necessarily do yourself. But now with the stun, you can do a lot of things yourself, and it makes the ult way stronger, and it makes Lash like way more of a utility character or have more potential. So I'd recommend that you guys try the chazm hamster Lash ult build. Obviously this build doesn't have any annotations and just has a lot of items that you might want to go or you might not want to go, so follow at your own risk. I'm gonna cook up my own Lash ult build eventually, but I haven't gotten to it quite yet because I've been frankly too busy playing PoE 2 and doing other things. But I will make my own Lash build. But for now, I think that this one is the one that I've been kind of experimenting with, and it feels pretty nice. Majestic Leap is really nice to get those ultimates, and so I'd recommend that you guys try it out. So Grey Talon got a decent amount of changes, the biggest one being the curse on his trap. So now his trap is called Spirit Snare, and basically if you shoot it or if it goes off, it curses the person in it. This makes Grey Talon very, very strong as a counter pick to people with channeling ultimates, for example, Moon Krill and Dynamo. And Grey Talon was already strong against Vindicta, who's just a strong hero in general right now. And so I think that this makes for a meta where Grey Talon is like pretty viable, especially if you're having a lot of issues with heroes like Dynamo or Moon Krill, etc. I would recommend that you try Grey Talon because he's a very large counter to them. I mean, you just kind of sit in the air, wait for them to use their ultimate, and then you just throw the trap and curse them, and you instantly cancel it. So it's pretty strong. As far as the build to follow, I'd recommend you guys follow Salty's build. Salty's my teammate, and last I heard, at least in NA, he was rank 1 Talon, and so I think pretty good build to follow, generally speaking. Of course, he's going to keep it up to date if there's any things that are different. So this is like a mix of like spirit and some gun items on Talon. Makes for a pretty strong build. But in general, regardless of what you build on Talon, I think he's pretty strong right now. So feel free to experiment, but the curse has definitely like pushed him up in terms of viability. He seems like he can be more of a counter pick, but he also seems like he can be just viable at all levels. Let's talk a little bit about the items that were changed this patch. So I want to highlight 3 items that I think were changed significantly enough to talk about. The first one is Crippling Headshot. Crippling Headshot was already a good item. What they did though was now it stacks. So if you have 2 crippling headshots on your team, it stacks. It's diminishing, meaning it's halved every time. So if one person shoots with crippling headshot, for example, let's say I shoot this dummy, he's going to have minus 24% bullet resist and spirit resist. However, if I have a teammate also shooting the dummy with crippling headshot, my teammate will do an additional 12%, so it'll be halved. And then if I have 3 crippling headshot, the third crippling headshot will do an additional 6%. So the third crippling headshot pretty much is no longer worth it, I would say. But having 2 crippling headshots late game makes it so you can get guaranteed 36% bullet resist and spirit resist reduction on a target if you're both shooting him and headshotting him every once in a while, which is very, very strong, especially since a lot of people buy improved armors late game, and that just kind of shreds through them. This does, in general, kind of buff shields a little bit too, because the more shred there is in the game, the better shields are because they're not affected by it. But I just wanted to let you guys know that late game, you should pretty much always aim to have 2 crippling headshots on your team. Second item is Frenzy. Frenzy was already quite a good item. I mean, it gave a lot of stats and it just felt very strong. But now, on top of giving a lot of stats, it builds off of Berserker, which gives a lot of damage. So now Frenzy is just like an insane statistic item. And if you're taking a lot of damage, it's very slot efficient to have Frenzy late into the game. And I think it's even stronger than it already was, which it was already quite strong. And so I'd recommend that on any character where you're building gun, consider Frenzy. Just try it out. It feels great to buy, so just trust me on this. Try it out. If you don't like it, then don't buy it, but like, it feels really, really good right now. Last 2 items I want to talk about are E-Shift and Silence Cliff. I know I said I only wanted to talk about 3, but I forgot about Silence Cliff. So if you line up enemies, Silence Cliff goes through them and silences all of them. So as you can see here, I hit all 3, silences all 3. I think this has incredible potential with combos. I haven't seen too much usage yet, but I just wanted to make sure that you guys are aware of this interaction. And like, for example, let's say that you lash ult 3 people and then you slam them and then you silence cliff them. That could, in theory, be a very strong combo. Haven't done too much testing around that, but just keep that in mind. If you have a Dynamo on your team and they, your Dynamo ults, you can silence cliff everyone. Anything that has an AoE ability, you'll be able to just hit a ton of silence cliff. And so it's probably going to be pretty strong. And the last item is Ethereal Shift. What they changed is that you can now move in Ethereal Shift very, very slowly. This might not seem like a big deal, but this realistically in most situations gives you an extra like 6 meters and sometimes allows you to just like kind of move around corners very sneakily, right? Making you much harder to catch because I'm able to, for example, reach this rope or something. So the item was already really good. I really don't think it needed a buff, but it did receive a buff, which makes it even better and I think worth mentioning. All right, last but not least, tier list. So last week, this was what the tier list looked like. So I just took the tier list that I had from last week and we're going to go from there. And I'm going to move heroes around based on what I feel has changed. So we're going to start with extremely strong Viscous, Shiv, Paradox, Ladygeist, Haze. So I think out of these, I would move Haze down. So I think Haze is either strong or good right now. I think I would put her in the strong category. She's fallen off a little bit. She's received some nerfs. And I think that she's still quite good, but I don't think she's necessarily as broken as she was initially. The sleep changes and some other things has made it so she's a little bit weaker. Still quite strong, but I would put her down a notch. Other than that, all the other heroes in extremely strong were basically either not touched or changed in a way that's not really a nerf. For example, Ladygeist, I don't think was really nerfed. She was changed. I mean, her silence doesn't have her second ability doesn't have silence anymore, but she has it on her ult and an AoE, which might even be better sometimes. And overall, I don't think she was really nerfed, and so I think she's still very extremely strong. Shiv wasn't really touched either. He was just had like a bug fix, which only helped him. Viscous is extremely strong, and Paradox is like Paradox was like slightly nerfed, but I think she's still extremely strong. Now, I will say, if you are playing solo queue only, Paradox is weaker. So Paradox, if you're playing solo queue only, is probably like in either strong or good. Now, if we look at strong, Pocket, Warden, Kelvin, Abrams, Ivy, Dynamo, Vindicta, McGinnis, Monkrill, and Haze. Most of these characters weren't touched very much. Abrams was slightly nerfed on his gun damage. I don't think that really changes much. Warden was also slightly nerfed. I think in my last tier list, I actually would have put Warden in extremely strong. I believe that me putting Warden in strong was kind of a mistake. It should probably be extremely strong. But now I think Warden belongs in strong. The only hero that I might consider moving around is Pocket. I think Pocket's probably either at the bottom of strong or in good. I might even put him in good. I haven't seen enough Pockets pop off I mean, it's still respect banned against Ido, for example, but I haven't seen a lot of pockets just have like huge impact in tournament. It's probably still really, really good. So it's either in top of good or like somewhere in strong, I would say, just because it has insane damage amp and cooldowns, etc. So still really good. Other than that, I think that I'm confident with the rest of the people in strong. I mean, Ivy's insane, Kelvin's insane. Like all of these heroes just have a lot of potential. And the thing about Deadlock right now is that most of the heroes are actually like very strong. Like they keep buffing heroes. They're not really nerfing a lot of heroes. They're just making a lot of heroes stronger. That's mostly what they're doing. So there's a bit of a power creep. There's been a power creep in the last 6 months in Deadlock. All the heroes are kind of stronger than they were 6 months ago. If we talk about the heroes that are good, last week I had Mirage, Yamato, Wraith, Lash. I say last week, but it's more like 2 weeks ago. So the biggest change I would say is Mirage is extremely strong, and I would also put Yamato in extremely strong. And so I think that these are two like very high priority heroes this patch. And I would also say that Lash has moved from good into strong, and Wraith I'm still kind of unsure of, so I'll leave her in good for now. But I think Mirage and Yamato definitely got huge upgrades, and this is reflected in their win rates if you look across the board as well. As far as the heroes that I described as okay, such as Great Talon, Infernus, and Bebop. So I believe that Great Talon is now at the very minimum good, if not strong. I'm only putting him in good because I think that he's a little bit situational and he still has some clear weaknesses to getting jumped on, etc. But I think that in coordinated environments, especially, Great Talon can be very strong as a counterpick to either Vindicta or heroes with channel ultimates, such as Dynamo and Mooncrow, even maybe McGinnis to an extent. Infernus received some considerable buffs as well, so I would put him in good. And Bebop also got some buffs, which means that he goes from okay to good as well. Which means the last hero that was in the need buff category, 7, actually got buffs, very slightly, but a change on his ult that is, I would say, welcome and makes it more interesting and more fun. And I would put 7 at the very least in okay, and actually I would put him in good even. And so I don't really think that as far as heroes that need buffs anymore, I don't really think that a lot of heroes in the game need buffs. I think that all of the heroes in the game have a place. They are all viable. If I pick any of these heroes on my team in a tournament, I wouldn't be sad. And so I think hero balance wise, we're in a decent spot. Personally, I think that they should be focusing on maybe taking away some power from the heroes that are too strong, a little bit OP, rather than buffing all the other heroes to be to the same power level. But they seem to be more on the buffing train rather than the nerf train, so they're giving a lot of buffs to heroes that have maybe underperformed a little bit. Now you might think, oh, some heroes are clearly bad if you look at win rates. Let's talk about win rates for a second, just for those that are still watching. It's probably a small percentage of you, but we can take a look at the win rates. All right, so if we look at the win rates across all ranks, we see Warden is at the top of the leaderboard in win rates. I think Warden is just a hero that's honestly like quite easy to play, and so you're going to see high win rates across brackets. Even if you look Ascendant Plus, his win rate's still really high. I think the win rate's like, the hero's really good, and it's obviously like a hero that's good to win with in pubs. But if we just look across the board, like let's look at the lowest win rates. Like Pocket having a low win rate is a factor mostly of rank, I think. If you like go up in ranks, like Pocket's win rate goes up tremendously. So if you go like just Ascendant or even Ascendant Plus, Pocket's win rate is up a lot. As you can see here in Ascendant Plus, Pocket's win rate is at 49.83, which is right around 50%, which is not bad at all. It did go down by 3%, so the hero like was probably significantly nerfed from what we saw. But a reason why these win rates are not really indicative of power, in my opinion, is because, for example, we're seeing a hero like Haze with a 90% pick rate and a 45% win rate, losing 3% win rate. Now, does this mean that Haze is now bad? Not necessarily. I think there's a lot of people that don't know how to properly pilot the heroes and aren't very creative with their builds or aren't innovative. And a lot of the time there are hidden gems in any meta and in any game. And so I personally believe that all of these heroes have a viable spot in the meta. And I think Shiv is extremely strong. And so the fact that he only has a 47% win rate to me is kind of strange, because you see Shiv being like pretty high prio by teams like in NA, like Hydra Nation have high prioed Shiv many times, and I think he's extremely strong. He's got an execute, he's very tanky, does a lot of damage, like he has a lot of things going for him. His biggest weakness is that he doesn't have a lot of mobility really, and he doesn't have any CC, so he can't really initiate or anything like that. But regardless, I think win rates are to be taken with a grain of salt. I think the most interesting to look at is the win rate change. So usually this is a good indication that a hero's probably been nerfed or buffed in some way, or that the meta is more or less favorable. However, if you look Ascendant Plus, I mean, the pool of matches is still quite small. Like, for example, for Pocket here in Ascendant Plus across all regions, we only have about 1,500 matches since the last patch. So sometimes you might have to even go down to Phantom Plus, and then once you go down to Phantom Plus, you start having like a reasonable sample size, which will indicate like, okay, like Haze is probably worse than she was, Pocket is worse than she was. Are they, you know, that much worse? Not necessarily. It could also be that people haven't adjusted their builds to follow up with the new meta or with the new patches, which I believe is the case, for example, for McGinnis, where I believe Gun McGinnis is quite strong, but Turret McGinnis obviously got, you know, nerfed pretty hard, I would say. So Gun McGinnis is probably the new way to play her, but how many McGinnis players are actually playing Gun McGinnis? Probably you know, fairly small amount. Anyways, that's it for my rant. If you're still watching, I'm live most days on twitch.tv, so, you know, check me out in the description. I'm also live on YouTube, so thank you guys for the support, and I'll see you next time.